Honestly, sir, your presence is just bad for business. Those marks on your face, your hands, they're unsettling for our more distinguished clientele. Frankly, they're disgusting." The words, slick and venomous, slithered from the restaurant. Manager's lips, each syllable, a tiny shard of ice aimed at the old man seated alone in the plush booth. Arthur Jenkins, his worn tweed jacket, a stark contrast to the shimmering faux gold cutlery, merely lowered his gaze to the half-eaten plate of Salisbury steak, a rare treat he had promised himself. The warmth of the meal had long since been chased away by the chill of the manager's disdain. A tremor, almost imperceptible, ran through. His calloused hands that bore the silvery trails of old burns, testaments to a life lived, a life sacrificed. He didn't speak. He didn't protest. He just absorbed the insult. Another layer of scar tissue forming over a wound that never truly healed. This was the quiet humiliation he'd come to expect, but it never stung any less. If you believe that true heroes walk, among us, often unseen and uncelebrated, comment "respect" below and let their stories be heard. Arthur's day had begun like any other in his small, sparsely furnished apartment. The early morning sun filtered through dusty blinds, illuminating a room filled with echoes of a past he rarely spoke of. A single faded photograph on his nightstand showed a younger Arthur, barely a man, surrounded by other young men in fatigues, their arms slung around each other, smiles wide and hopeful. Despite the grim backdrop of a jungle clearing, he'd risen slowly, his joints aching with familiar protest, the ghosts of old injuries whispering their daily greeting. Today was an anniversary of sorts, a quiet personal one. 47 years since a day of fire and blood, a day that had etched itself not just onto his skin but deep within his soul. He had decided on a whim to eat out, to sit in a place with soft lighting and gentle music, to pretend, just for an hour, that the world was a kinder, more welcoming place. He'd chosen the Gilded Spoon based on a flyer he'd found, promising an unparalleled dining experience. He'd ironed his best shirt, the faded blue one, and put on the tweed jacket, a relic from a time when he'd felt more a part of the world. His nature was quiet, unassuming, a man who preferred the shadows to the spotlight, his voice rarely rising above a gentle murmur. He wasn't seeking accolades, merely a moment of peace, a decent meal, perhaps a fleeting sense of normalcy. He arrived at the Gilded Spoon as the lunch rush was beginning to wane. The restaurant was an exercise in opulent aspiration, a symphony of polished brass, dark wood, and velvet upholstery that felt more like a stage set than a dining establishment. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, if somewhat ostentatious, glow over the tables, most of which were occupied by well-dressed patrons. Their laughter and conversation, a low, confident hum. Arthur felt the familiar prickle of self-consciousness. As he stepped inside, his worn shoes silent on the plush carpet, a young server barely out of her teens with kind eyes and a nervous smile greeted him. "Table for one, sir?" she asked, her voice soft. He nodded, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. She led him to a booth tucked away in a corner, perhaps sensing his desire for anonymity. He thanked her, settled in, and perused the menu, the prices making him wince internally. He ordered the Salisbury steak, a comfort food from his youth, and a glass of water. He watched the other diners, their easy confidence, their unblemished skin, their lives seemingly untouched by the kind of crucible that had forged his. He didn't begrudge them their ease. He simply observed an outsider looking in, a ghost at the feast. He was just starting to relax, the aroma of the food a welcome comfort, when a shadow fell over his table. Chadwick Chad Miller, the manager, approached with the predatory grace of a shark circling its prey. He was a man in his late 30s, his dark hair slicked back, his suit expensive but ill-fitting, a study in forced sophistication. His eyes, small and assessing, swept over Arthur, lingering on the faded jacket, the work-roughened hands, and the prominent scar that traced a path from Arthur's left temple across his cheekbone, disappearing beneath his collar. A sneer, subtle but unmistakable, tugged at the corner of Chad's lips. "Good afternoon," Chad began, his tone dripping with insincere politeness. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Arthur looked up, his expression mild. "Yes, thank you." "The meal is fine." Chad leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet condescending whisper. "It's just that, well, we cultivate a certain ambiance here at the Gilded Spoon, a level of clientele, you understand." He gestured vaguely at the other diners, Arthur's brow furrowed slightly. "I'm not sure I do understand, son." The use of the word son seemed to irritate Chad. His smile tightened. "What I mean, sir, is that your appearance is perhaps not quite in keeping with our establishment's image." He made a delicate, dismissive gesture toward Arthur's visible scars. "Those marks, they can be a bit off-putting for some of our patrons." Arthur's hand instinctively went to the scar on his cheek, a familiar, unconscious gesture. He said nothing, his gaze steady, a deep well of patience in his eyes that Chad mistook for weakness. The manager, clearly enjoying his petty display of power, pressed on, his voice regaining its earlier volume, loud enough for nearby tables to overhear. "We pride ourselves on a refined atmosphere. Distractions, you see, are unwelcome." The air around Arthur's table grew thick with unspoken judgment. A few diners glanced over, some with curiosity, others with a shared disdain mirroring the manager's. The young server who had seated Arthur watched from near the kitchen doorway, her face pale, her fists clenched at her sides, a portrait of helpless empathy. Arthur finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm, carrying no trace of anger. "Only a profound weariness. These marks, as you call them, are a part of who I am. They tell a story," Chad scoffed, a short, derisive sound. "Perhaps. But this isn't the place for such stories. This is a high-class restaurant, not a place for people who look like they've been through a meat grinder." The cruelty of the remark hung in the air, raw and ugly. Arthur's shoulders slumped just a fraction, the only outward sign of the blow. He picked at his cooling meal, his appetite gone. "Are those war things?" Chad continued, his tone a blend of morbid curiosity and revulsion. "You know, we try to keep politics and unpleasantness out of the Gilded Spoon. It's about the experience, the luxury." He puffed out his chest slightly. "Some of our guests are sensitive. They come here to escape the harsh realities of the world, not to be confronted by them." Arthur looked directly at Chad then, his eyes holding a sudden, piercing clarity. "There are some realities, young man, from which there is no escape, only endurance." Chad, however, was too enamored with his own authority to perceive the depth behind those words. He saw only an old man, poorly dressed, scarred, and, in his mind, an unwelcome blight on his pristine establishment. Emboldened by Arthur's continued stoicism, Chad leaned both hands on the table, looming over the older man. His voice dripped with finality. "Look, I'm going to be blunt. Your presence is damaging our brand. People come here for an aesthetic. And frankly, sir, you're an eyesore. Those scars, they're disgusting. We've had complaints. This was a lie. The only complaint was the one brewing in Chad's own prejudiced mind. I'm going to have to ask you to finish up quickly and leave, and perhaps find establishments more suited to your circumstances in the future." Arthur's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The years of quiet suffering, of casual disrespect, of being judged solely on the tapestry of pain etched into his skin, seemed to coalesce in that single brutal moment. He set his fork down with deliberate slowness. For a long moment he simply looked at Chad, a deep, sorrowful understanding in his gaze. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades, he reached slowly into the inner pocket of his tweed jacket. Chad watched, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips, expecting Arthur to pull out a wallet, to pay, and slink away. Instead, Arthur retrieved an old, battered flip phone, a relic from a bygone era. He flipped it open, his scarred fingers surprisingly nimble, as he pressed a single speed dial button. He held the phone to his ear. It rang twice. "Evans?" Arthur's voice was low, almost a whisper, yet it carried an undeniable authority that momentarily startled Chad. "It's Arthur Jenkins. I'm at a place called the Gilded Spoon downtown." "Yes? Yes, I could use a little company. Thank you." He closed the phone and placed it gently on the table beside his plate. Chad scoffed, recovering his composure. "Calling? For backup, old man? What are you going to do? Have your bingo buddies come down and complain?" He laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Arthur didn't respond. He simply waited, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the restaurant walls. Less than 5 minutes later, an eternity for Chad, who paced impatiently, and a moment of quiet contemplation for Arthur. The ornate double doors of the Gilded Spoon swung open with a decisive push. The ambient chatter of the restaurant, the clinking of cutlery, the soft music, it all seemed to hush, then die, as if a vacuum had sucked the sound from the room. Framed in the entrance was a figure that commanded instant attention. Colonel Marcus Evans, tall and broad-shouldered, stood ramrod straight, his U.S. Army dress blues immaculate, the ribbons on his chest a vibrant testament to a long and distinguished career. His face was stern, his eyes sharp, as they swept the room, missing nothing. Behind him, visible through the glass, more figures in identical dress uniforms fanned out, their presence filling the doorway, their polished boots gleaming, their posture radiating an aura of disciplined power. There were at least 10 of them, men and women, a silent, formidable phalanx. The air in the Gilded Spoon crackled with a new, palpable tension. Diners froze, forks halfway to their mouths. Conversations cut short. Chad, who had been preening near the maitre d' stand, turned, an irritated question forming on his lips, then stopped dead. His jaw literally dropped, his face paling to a sickly, chalky white. The smugness vanished, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. Colonel Evans's gaze locked onto Arthur, seated quietly in his corner booth. Ignoring Chad's stunned, open-mouthed gape, Evans strode purposefully across the restaurant, his every step measured and resonant on the plush carpet. The other uniformed soldiers followed, their movements precise, economical, as they moved to flank the aisle, creating an honor guard of sorts. Chad, jolted into motion by a primal instinct of self-preservation mixed with a desperate attempt to reclaim control, scurried forward. "Sir, Colonel, welcome to the Gilded Spoon. Can I help you? Do you have a reservation?" His voice was a squeak, a pathetic shadow of its earlier arrogance. Colonel Evans didn't even glance at him. He continued directly to Arthur's table, stopping directly in front of the older man. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. Years of shared history, of respect forged in the crucible of combat. Then Colonel Evans's stern features softened into a look of profound respect and affection. "Arthur Jenkins," he said, his voice clear and strong, resonating through the now utterly silent restaurant. "It is an honor to see you, sir." He then executed a crisp, perfect salute, not a casual gesture, but a full, formal salute, a mark of the deepest military respect. The other 10 soldiers, as one, snapped to attention, their eyes fixed forward, i.e., silent, powerful tribute. Arthur slowly, almost painfully, pushed himself a little straighter in his seat. A flicker of something, pride, sorrow, remembrance, passed across his face. He gave a slight acknowledging nod. "Marcus," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you for coming." Chad's face had drained of all color. He looked from Arthur to the colonel, then to the stoic soldiers lining the aisle, his mind struggling to process the impossible scene unfolding before him. Colonel Evans slowly lowered his salute, his gaze still fixed on Arthur. Then he turned, his eyes like chips of ice, pinning Chad Miller to the spot. The manager visibly wilted, shrinking under the weight of that stare. "This man," Evans began, his voice low, controlled, yet carrying the unmistakable ring of command, each word a hammer blow, "this man, Arthur Jenkins, whose marks you found so unsettling—" He practically spat the word, earned every single one of them, saving the lives of men under his command, men like me. He tapped his own chest. In the Ayadrang Valley, November 1965, then Lieutenant Jenkins's platoon was ambushed, pinned down, taking heavy fire. Our APC was hit by an RPG. It was burning, ammunition cooking off. 3 of us were trapped inside, wounded, unconscious, myself included. His voice grew thick with emotion. While others sought cover, Lieutenant Jenkins, with no regard for his own safety, charged back into that inferno. He dragged Sergeant Peterson out, then Private Miller, then me. Evans paused, his gaze distant, as if seeing the smoke and fire of that day. He was hit multiple times. Shrapnel, burns. He took fire meant for us. Those disgusting scars you so casually denigrated today, Mr. Miller, are not blemishes. They are medals of honor. They are the testament of a hero who walked through hell and brought his men back. A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Diners stared first at Evans, then at Arthur, their expressions shifting from indifference or disdain to shock, awe, and a profound dawning shame. The young server near the kitchen openly wept, her hand covering her mouth. One of the uniformed soldiers, a woman with captain's bars, stepped forward slightly. "He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions that day, sir," she said, her voice filled with pride, addressing Evans but ensuring Chad heard every word, though he never wears it. Arthur simply looked down at his scarred hands, resting on the table. Chad was utterly speechless, his face a mask of disbelief and burgeoning terror. He looked like a fish gasping for air, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The patrons who had earlier smirked or looked away in discomfort now stared at Arthur with expressions of stunned reverence. Some had tears in their eyes. The sheer weight of their misjudgment, their casual cruelty, settled upon them. Colonel Evans continued, his voice like granite. "We were scheduled for our annual unit reunion lunch today, Mr. Miller, a tradition we've upheld for nearly 50 years. Arthur, Lieutenant Jenkins, was supposed to join us later. He said he wanted a quiet meal by himself first. A moment of reflection." He took a step closer to Chad, whose eyes were wide with panic. "He called me not to complain about your disgusting behavior, though he would have been well within his rights to do so. He called because he knew we were nearby. He called us family." Evans gestured broadly to the uniformed men and women standing silently, their presence an unbreakable wall of solidarity. And his family always answers. He took a step closer to Chad, whose eyes were wide with panic. "This man, who you deemed an eyesore, is the finest officer I have ever had the privilege to serve under. His courage, his sacrifice, it's the bedrock upon which soldiers like us build our lives. He deserves to eat in any establishment he chooses, and to be treated not just with courtesy, but with the deepest damn respect this country can offer." Chad finally found his voice, a pathetic, stammering whimper. "I didn't know. I am so... Sorry, please." Colonel Evans cut him off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "Save your apologies. They are as worthless as your judgment." He turned back to Arthur. "Sir, if you're ready, we have a table waiting for you at a place where your scars will be seen for what they are, symbols of honor, not shame." 2 of the soldiers stepped forward. One, a burly sergeant major, gently pulled out Arthur's chair. The other, the young female captain, offered Arthur her arm with a warm, respectful smile. Arthur looked at her, then at the colonel, then around at the faces of his men, his family. A slow, genuine smile, the first Chad had seen, spread across his weathered face, illuminating it from within. He took the captain's arm. "Thank you," he said, his voice stronger now. "I believe I'm ready." Arthur Jenkins walked out of the Gilded Spoon, not as a dismissed vagrant, but as an honored hero, flanked by his loyal unit. The remaining diners rose spontaneously to their feet. A wave of applause, hesitant at first, then growing in strength, filled the restaurant, a tardy but heartfelt tribute. Chad Miller was left standing alone, humiliated and trembling, the ruins of his arrogance crumbling around him. The owner of the Gilded Spoon arrived within the hour, summoned by a furious Colonel Evans, and a swift, decisive reckoning followed for Mr. Miller. His tenure as manager ended that very day. But the story didn't end there. The incident at the Gilded Spoon, once recounted by the unit members, sent ripples through the local community. Arthur, who had always lived quietly, found himself greeted with nods of respect on the street, with heartfelt handshakes from strangers who had heard his story. The true measure of a person is not found in their outward appearance, their clothes, or the smoothness of their skin, but in the content of their character and the courage within their heart. True heroes often bear scars, visible and invisible, reminders of battles fought and sacrifices made, not for glory, but for others. Weeks later, the young server from the Gilded Spoon, now working at a different, more welcoming cafe, saw Arthur passing by. He was walking a little taller, a quiet dignity radiating from him. Their eyes met. She smiled and gave a small, respectful nod. Arthur Jenkins, the man whose scars told a story of incredible bravery, smiled back and nodded. In return, a silent acknowledgment of shared humanity, a testament to the enduring power of respect finally given and honor finally seen. The Gilded Spoon, under new management, installed a small, discreet plaque near its entrance. With utmost gratitude and respect, we honor all who have served. Never judge a soul by the burdens they carry or the marks life has left upon them, for beneath the surface may lie a strength and nobility that could humble nations. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks if you believe in the quiet dignity of unsung heroes and the importance of treating every individual with the honor they deserve. Share this story if you agree that respect is earned through character, not appearance.